So it's 6:07. Let's call the meeting to order. And really the items of business today are to go through this blueprint and vote on it, to vote on it and to have discussion around it. So I'm going to share the screen. It was sent to you all as an attachment, as a PDF. You'll see that the document I am going to share, tell me, I just want to make sure you can all see it. Is it sharing? Yeah, there we go. You can all see it? Thumbs up. Okay. So what I'm going to do is make a motion to accept the document. And before we vote on it, we can have all the discussion that everybody wants, but we do have to at least get the motion on the table. So I will move to accept the draft of the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force Blueprint for the Town of Fairfield dated January 6th. Is there a second?
Second.
And Steve is coming in. So while we are just voting on this, Steve, you just got here in time to vote to accept the document. It doesn't mean we're voting on it yet. It just means we're moving it for discussion. Do you vote yes?
Yes.
Or no? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
noes or any abstentions? Okay, great. So now, is there any discussion on their item? Yes, on this item, yes, there is, at least from me. So the best way I think we can do this is we're just going to literally go through. I can't see everybody, so I think we'll just do this a little informally in the sense of if you have something as I'm scrolling, call out, and let's try and do it that way. And if we need to find a more formal way to do this. But the first item I'd like to bring up for as an amendment is this image. It was brought to my attention that this image, you see the one of the heads, is not gender neutral. So I've proposed swapping it out for this image of the hands. So I am going to make a motion to replace the two images. Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any noes? Okay, any abstentions? Okay, and this is a little, so let's just do that. We're going to change this to, okay. So now moving on, let me get this out of, I'm going to make it so I'm editor. All right, you still all with me?
Yes.
Okay, so the next discussion item I'd like to bring up is back to recommendations, initial and immediate actions for the Board of Selectmen, and the next item, recommendations, the subsequent priorities versus areas for further study. It had been brought to my attention from a few different people that they didn't like subsequent priorities. Some people don't like having the recommendations separated out at all. So I would love to hear from the task force members first. I know we had come up with this at our last meeting, but when some people were editing it, there were still comments that it wasn't quite right. So I want to bring it back to the group. The way the draft was submitted was areas for further study. So as it stands right now, it's recommendations. 3 is recommendations, initial and immediate actions for the Board of Selectmen. and 4 is recommendations, areas for further study. If we do not make a formal motion, it's going to remain as such. So is there any discussion on that? I wanted to bring this up because I know some people had a problem with it. So
it's what? Because right now they're both there. Right now they're both there. What's going to remain as areas for
it would remain as areas for further study.
Mm-hmm.
But I just put that there because that's what it was. So for the purposes of this discussion, I wanted to pull it up because that's where we landed last time. If the group wants to go back to making it subsequent priorities, fine. But it was submitted as areas for further study. Because again, when we were in the drafting phase, which was an open process, that's what came back a few times. So
I think I had commented that further study to me, especially when you just, follow it up with a list, not just here, but at the beginning of the section, felt somehow like it didn't represent to me the amount of work and the fact that they were concrete recommendations in there. I think I had suggested that maybe a remedy to that may be to put subsequent recommendations. You could even flip-flop the earlier one, like priority recommendations and then subsequent recommendations or something like that. Just
so you know, on your comment about a list in the body, if you'll notice in the draft, we took it out of bullet form and it's now as part of in that paragraph. So hopefully that's resolved. So it doesn't feel just like a list within the body.
Right, like that there's just to be studied.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, in these areas and we've moved on. So we fixed it within the context, but in terms of the list here itself, I don't know if anyone wants to respond to what
I agree
Ryan
with
is
it.
saying.
Yeah, the area of further study means it's not worthy. That's and what you have there, governance and education, they're all worthy of that. So I like the idea of subsequent priorities or what was recommended. Areas of further study is a lot weaker.
I think that's what I was feeling too. It just didn't seem like it carried the weight of what was followed.
I also agree. I think that it ends it by calling it further study.
Okay. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Gina, you were saying you also worry that.
I also agree. I worry that it makes it as though they are lesser priorities and they're not. I think that they're, I think at some point in the drafting process, we just wanted to highlight those 5 items. I think that language actually rounds up diminishing the rest of it, which is not what our goal is.
One thought is combining section 3 and 4. And instead of saying initial and immediate actions for the Board of Selectmen and just making section 3 recommendations and making it one whole thing. Because I think the way it's parsed out, and I'm going to leave the table of contents for a second. I mean, it is spelled out in the draft. I mean, it's nicely sort of organized in terms of these 5 priorities are listed, and then we go into, these areas. So I would want to find a way to be able to delineate.
Right.
But
I mean, I think if you do that, if you combine them, you're a little bit backtracking on what seemed to be very important, which was to get those most key things up front and put the word immediate on them. And I think that's why I think, the suggestion of subsequent is a good one, is a good word.
We landed at subsequent priorities if the group wants to go back to that.
It could be initial and immediate recommendations, or just recommendations, immediate and initial, intermediate, and then subsequent priorities, or subsequent recommendations or something like that. If priorities is a you know, hang.
I would recommend that. I recommend that we keep the same word. Like I don't think we need to delineate between recommendations and priorities. I think we should call them both the same thing and just say immediate recommendations. Additional word that goes with recommendations.
Yeah, maybe do a sub.
Not really different.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so to move this right now, I just want to reiterate, right now as it is in the blueprint, it is this, areas for further study, recommendations. If we are going to put it back to subsequent priorities, someone has to make a motion and we have to vote on it. Or if there's other language. Does anyone outside the official task force member or other task force members, anyone want to weigh in on this?
This is Matt. I just put this in the chat, but what if you get rid of the capitalized recommendations language, which all caps can oftentimes seem clunky anyway, and just title them initial recommendations and immediate actions for the BOS, and then additional recommendations.
Yeah.
So initial.
That's kind of what I was saying too, like start out like initial and immediate recommendation. Yeah.
So you're saying, so initial and immediate actions for the Board of Selectmen would be section 3.
It would just, I was thinking initial recommendations.
Yeah.
And immediate actions for the BOS.
Yeah, I like that.
And then additional recommendations for part 4.
So initial recommendations and actions for the BOS, and then part 4 are subsequent recommendations, or how do you, subsequent priorities?
I think additional recommendations, that way it's not about ordering them, right? I mean, if someone wants to move forward with something in part 4,
yeah,
before they move forward in something with something in part 3, I don't think anyone on the task force is going to be opposed to that.
I like it. I like that.
So as initial recommendations and actions for the Board of Selectmen, and then additional recommendations.
Yep.
I was also wondering if there's a reason that was that highlighted only because of this discussion?
To make it, yep. Okay. And because I wanted to make sure when we were reviewing it, they were areas you'll see throughout, like I've gotten a few comments separately, and I've highlighted them just so we know, because they're different than what the draft that you received. Like there, you'll notice what I'm talking about when I move down. So like that was a change. So any other discussion on this? I just, in the interest of time, I know this is an important one, but if we all feel comfortable, anyone else have a comment? Right now it's changing the language as it was initial recommendations and actions for the Board of Selectmen, and then additional recommendations.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to amend the table of context the table of contents as discussed, as written here.
Second the motion, Nancy.
Okay, Annie, thank you. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Jason is up. Steve?
Aye.
Okay, great. Who did I miss? Sandra, Tamisha? Aye, perfect. I don't think I missed anyone. Okay, any abstentions? Yep, good. Thank you. Okay. So now my plan is to scroll through the document. And anyone, I'll ask questions along the way. Did I miss anybody in terms of, there was an order thing. I had put Sonia after Ryan. I just switched it up alphabetically. I'll make a motion to make sure that's okay. It's an alphabetical thing. Is there a second for that motion?
Second, Ryan.
Ryan, any objections? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any abstentions or? Okay, great. And again, it's a small thing, but I just want to make sure that we're getting it right here. Okay. And if I'm, you know, I would hope everybody would look through this in case we missed somebody. I think we've gotten everybody, but just in case before, it's okay. So now the introduction. I'll go quickly unless you all stop me. So we have the introduction, we have the sources, we have some art, we have the Fairfield Town profile. We have, moving along to the formation of the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force. We have a link to an article that talked about what we've done here is, you'll see throughout the draft, is we make statements and then we have the backup sources, the data that follows. We decided not to do an appendix. It's much easier to follow it this way. So we have the charge, we have the meeting minutes and agenda, we have the research methods employed, we have the data hub and that source. Moving on from the deep listening projects, we have all the people. I hope what you are all realizing as we scroll through this, how much work this represents. And I just want to say, in culling together all of this information, it's been really encouraging how much effort and attention and detail has gone into this and how much work was done. And I hope you're all now, with 15 months in our rearview mirror, hope you're feeling good about where this landed, and at least the you can see scrolling through just how in-depth it's been. So the findings from the deep listening and our other research, the community conversation with a transcript, the community roundtable, the expert presentations from the various experts, a list of all the resources that we use, including CCM, the National League of Cities, etc. Experiencing racism in Fairfield, just some of the examples, including a link to a video of the one of the incidents and backup. Here, I want to now bring attention to a concern that Tamisha brought up. And I had made a suggestion with the sentence. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Always.
Didn't they determine that the Zoom bomb was somebody outside of Fairfield, like from the Midwest or something? And I'm only asking that because it's under the headline of racism in Fairfield, and unless it's just because of the experience, is that what it's going for? That
I can only speak from Gina. Sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of who did it, it did happen in Fairfield, 2 people in Fairfield. So I think that's why it doesn't matter.
That's fine. That's fine. I didn't know. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, so Tamisha, did you want to?
What, Nancy, can you tell me what page that's on, just so I can note?
Yeah, I mean, here it may not be the same as the PDF. So I think it may be your page 10.
Okay, let's see. And what section is that in?
Tamisha, did you want to?
Yeah, that's fine. So what was striking for me was the word many. Black and brown people. I'm sorry, I'm kind of winded. And what my thoughts were around this is that I believe many should have been quantitative and supplied with that data, because to say many, it's many out of how much. We know that there's 60,000 residents in Fairfield alone. We know that there's 2% of those residents are Black, which is 1,200. And then the Asian, it's about 3%, which becomes like 1,800. So out of that, 3,000 set of folks, how many is many? So that's why I didn't want it, because many can be kind of misleading. Like if I didn't live in Fairfield and I was looking for somewhere to live and I'm relocating from California and I'm reading this article, I'm gonna be like, oh my God, I don't want to move to Fairfield because there's a lot of racism going on in that town. So I think, for the betterment of Fairfield, we need to have, that data collected and then represented in wording. And I think that's something we could suggest the permanent commission to do, because we need to quantitate, the data that we're saying is occurring as a systematic issue in Fairfield.
I agree with Tamisha.
Okay, any other? Comments?
So, what's your suggestion there, Tanisha?
I would suggest, we remove the word many and put in instances. There have been, few instances or several instances, but many seems like there's a lot of this going on in the town. Like we're having instances every day, or, a few times a month.
Well, you can't not put many, but put any, or put any other, you can't put any other word. You can't put a few or some, or it's either nothing or what it is.
About the personal reflections that were shared with the task force.
Yes, I agree with that, what Ryan's saying. Because the people who came forward to the task force are the people who expressed that sentiment.
Exactly. And I want their voice to be, noted here.
I don't recall I don't recall us hearing from Black and brown people who did not support that statement. So that, if you want to talk about data, you could say that many of the people who came forward said that.
I think that is one way around it. That, yeah, you could say that many of the respondents, that is accurate.
Well, we'll read it again. Read it again without the word many.
I'm going to just interject and say that if you could keep the comments out of the chat box, Matt, Emma, thank you for your thoughts and input. But if we could just keep the chat box just to either be acknowledged, or just because I want all of this to happen where everyone sees everybody's comments and I just don't want to miss anything. Sorry, Steve, to interrupt you.
Whoever just read that, can you read it again without the word many and just?
I think it was Kathy.
Kathy?
I think it was Ryan actually, but
Ryan, can you read it again without the word many?
And by, let's see, supported by extensive research and by personal reflections collected in task force community conversations, or collected or heard in community community conversations.
Yeah, a collection of the task force community conversations.
Yeah.
So it seems like we're all, Tamisha, thank you for bringing that up. And it sounds like, there is consensus to clarify. So if there is no further discussion, or maybe there is, but if someone wants to put a motion forward, we can respond to that with more exact wording, or do you think we need a little more time to talk this through?
I think it would be good if we had the exact wording, Nancy. It would, if we can just put a sentence over there as to what we're saying, what it is.
Yep. If someone wants to make that motion. Gina, are you trying to say something?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say what it is there. I think if we could just put it together as a sentence.
All right, yeah. So does someone, Tamisha, did you want to make the motion?
Can we put it in, can you actually type the change there and so that everybody can see it?
I just need to know what the change is. Someone has to say it officially.
Motivated instance can have a lasting and profound negative impact.
Nancy, can you I move a motion for you to make that change for the task force to see how the sentence would look?
I just need to know what the sentence is officially. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Ryan, could you just repeat what you said?
Yeah, I'm trying to get the wording exactly right. And so extensive research and by reality, supported by extensive research and by reflections collected or heard in the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force community conversations.
By members of the Black and Brown community. Because we've taken out the word Black and Brown.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be in there.
Collected and heard, research. Let's see. Extensive research. Okay, wait a minute. This is two separate things.
I think we don't need to talk about, I think we're talking, what about if we just take out the word many?
And endorsed by.
But Gina, what if we just take out the word, literally just take out the word many?
Oh, that works too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Take out the word many.
Just literally keep it and just,
I agree. It's Katrina on the phone. I was online, but I lost internet connection, but I agree, take out many as well.
And by the personal reflections of Black and Brown.
Tamisha, does that satisfy what you were trying to convey?
Yep, that's perfect.
Because I think we're trying to overcomplicate it, because we want to acknowledge that these are the reflections of people who came forward. We don't want to quantify it, but we want to acknowledge it. So if we take out the word many, we may be able to still accomplish those two things.
Instead of saying here, should we say reflections of Black and Brown people heard during task force community conversations, to be more specific?
I think that's fair, Ryan.
Or does that limit, because I guess we did hear other stories.
People,
it wasn't just the community conversations, and that's where I would push back.
Yeah, okay, all right. All right, I think here. Yeah, because as I'm saying that, I'm realizing, no, we heard from people that came to the meetings. We heard about other incidents around town, so yeah, it was sensitive.
Can we also give voice to the Caucasian folks that spoke up as well on behalf of the incidences they've experienced? So can we put reflections of Black or Caucasian, Black and Brown people, however, but they were included in that data.
I'm just putting it so we can. And how would you want to express that?
You can add it in, so Black, Caucasian, and brown people. That's what I was thinking. Just keep it in that same context.
But it's the reflect. Okay, I see what you're saying. To me, that changes the intention of.
But that's the truth of it, though, Nancy. You know, because it's not painting a picture that the Black and brown folks here in Fairfield are a standoff and they're alone. There are people in the community that aren't Black and brown that have voiced their concerns. And I think that their voice should also be reflected.
Yeah, but the paragraph doesn't speak to that.
Right. Tamisha, if you could explain it further, because what I'm hearing is what Innie is just saying, that this is not about the white people standing as allies, but the Black and brown people expressing their lived experience.
Well, what about that interracial couple where the wife, that's her lived experience, and she's not, you know, Black or brown, she's Caucasian. She was a part of that experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But she's reflecting on the experience of her husband.
No, she went into the office on behalf of her husband. It was a whole experience. Yeah. It wasn't just her husband alone. She had to go in to continue their goal of getting their marriage license. And she was the one in tears in the office, you know, with whoever the advisor was of that individual that treated her husband.
I mean, which I guess then if we're going to say that, does it make sense to say that racially charged or motivated incidents can have a lasting and profound negative impact? It's a reality supported by extensive research and by personal reflections of residents.
Right, and the research actually supports. I mean, the issue there is that the research actually supports the lasting effect on Black and brown people. It's actually specifically about the lasting effects of racism on
people,
the Black and brown recipients, which is different than the research that's done on white bystanders. It's not the same research that we're talking about here.
So you're, Gina, saying to take out bikes just after just kind of cutting this whole last sentence, just putting it and supported by expensive research.
Just cut the whole last sentence and say it's supported by extensive research.
So it would be this: racially charged or motivated incidents can have a lasting and profound negative impact, a reality supported by extensive research, period. Does that?
I'm good with that. That's fine.
Sorry.
Yeah, but you weakened this paragraph. Because in the beginning of the paragraph, there's no mention as to where this, where this racism is directed. It comes right at the end.
What if you added in the next sentence, these indignities as experienced by Black and brown people, comma, are especially damaging when they are repetitive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because we're talking about the indignities themselves. We're not talking about the number of incidents. We're not talking about many incidents. We're talking about the impact on Black and brown people. The lasting and profound negative impact. So if you added these indignities, comma, as experienced by Black and brown people, comma, are especially damaging when they are public. Yeah. I mean, that could bring that back into the paragraph if that's what you're aiming for.
Are there any other comments and just a reminder, we don't have a formal motion yet to change this. So
I'd like to hear Gina. Gina, what do you think about adding after these, after in that sentence, the second sentence, these indignities?
Gina.
We lose her.
Right. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are you hearing me twice? Sorry. Okay. I think that's fine. I think that I think if we added at the end of the first sentence, I mean, I agree that we're kind of shifting the meaning around by getting stuck on the word many, because we do want to talk about this. It later on goes to talk about the impact in the town of Fairfield. So
does, as highlighted, the sentence racially charged or motivated incidents can have a lasting and profound negative impact, a reality supported by extensive research, period. Cutting out the word many and the last part of that sentence, and then going on as with the rest of the paragraph. Does it accomplish what it's meant to, its intention, to a place where people are at least comfortable enough?
I think I'm comfortable with that.
So without the addition of as
Correct.
experienced by, okay.
Especially because I think hopefully it's there and sort of speaks to that.
I am uncomfortable because you see, while you've got later on, while race might not appear to be a prominent issue to the majority white population, this report found a persistent and widening gap in how our school system serves its Black and brown students. It comes right at the bottom. You know, in the middle. I mean, we're not calling it out. We're not saying that these indignities really damage the Black and brown population. Because later on you do say, I mean, this is not a problem of the town, right? But while race might not appear to be a prominent issue to the majority white population, this report found a persistent and widening gap. So my question here is, why is there a hesitation to call it out right in the first two sentences of the paragraph? So you know that the paragraph is really highlighting them.
But aren't they two different things? I mean, we're talking about the first sentence is talking about racially charged or motivated incidents. And then the other sentence, Innie, what you're talking about is education in the schools. And that kind of goes, that's talking more about achievement gaps, you know?
So if Sandra, I go by what you have said, then the problem is even wider. The problematic is that we have not even addressed the first part, because now we've gone to education and we've overlooked the first part of it.
I think is the sentence back to the way it was, Nancy, so we can take another look at it.
Okay, hold on.
I think that reads well.
Yeah, I do too. I think that needs to be there. Yeah. And also it places it back in Fairfield too, rather than this is just like, you know, research. It's saying, yeah, we had personal reflections to support that as well. And you know, taking the word many out, but leaving the personal reflections and the word here.
Yeah. I'm good with this.
So if someone wants, oh, I'm sorry.
We're just really removing the word many, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So if someone wants to make that motion.
I make the motion to remove the word many.
Is there a second?
I second.
Misha?
Yeah, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any noes? Okay. Removed. Thank you. Okay. Moving on, moving in a direction that makes a difference. It's really about what the framework of the blueprint has been. And again, sources, Racial Equity and Justice Task Force. This is a restatement of the mission. We will change the heading, and I'm not going to do it here as we're on the phone.
Nancy, what will the heading be?
It's as we discussed, we voted on before here, initial recommendations and actions for the Board of Selectmen, and then additional recommendations.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that
I'll change to here. I'm just not going to have to sit on the phone or sit on the call, but it will be reflected in the amended. This will change. Tamisha, did you want to?
Yeah, so for point number 3, another word issue I had was the word systemic. And I don't believe that there's a systemic issue of racism in Fairfield, but I do believe there are anomalies of racism in the town of Fairfield. And for us to require our town to make a public acknowledgement of systematic racism, you know, saying that, you know, racism is common here in Fairfield, I think that will be totally damaging to the town of Fairfield. We're not saying that racism does not exist, but what I don't approve of is us saying that it's something that it's a lifestyle of living in Fairfield. Like, expect to encounter racism. And I've been here 4 years and I have not.
I have.
I know, I'm not saying that it does not exist, but what I'm saying is we cannot blanket the town saying that everywhere you go here in Fairfield, you as a Black, Brown, Asian person will encounter racism. I think we acknowledge, you know, that there are anomalies of racism. Like you can encounter racism just like you can encounter a rape, you can encounter a drunk. But to say everyone in Fairfield are rapists or drunks, I don't think that's fair, because that hasn't been my experience, not negating anyone else's experience. But I think we have to come down the middle line of partition here. I don't think we should go, you know, extreme in one direction versus the other. We acknowledge that there are anomalies of racism. And in order for us to not allow the town to go down the road of it developing into a systemic, you know, place of racism, this is what we suggest.
So are you suggesting removing the word systemic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Yep. I agree with that.
And so we would just, so your suggestion is just to remove the word systemic and just leave the word racism?
How does it read? The town of Fairfield shall make a formal proclamation and adopt a subsequent resolution acknowledging that
the existence and impact.
The existence of racism, yeah. But to say systemic is.
I mean, the only argument I would make for that is, I think you actually, when we remove the word systemic, we're actually talking more about personal interactions versus the things that are nobody's fault, the things that are just kind of happen that nobody does willfully, which is, I think, the whole purpose behind the word systemic. It is not that it doesn't mean that it flows through the entire system. It means that there are things that are systematic that don't have really anything to do with someone being mean to someone else or someone doing something to someone else. It's more things like the things that we outlined further on, like the traffic
systemic
and the school. Systemic in that term
means common,
about
means
the system.
Throughout.
No, it actually doesn't mean common. It means
it doesn't?
No, it actually
means
doesn't
baked
mean
in. It means baked
right.
into the system. It's just part of the
it's what
way
it's
that
baked
it's just part of the system.
Baked in. It's just
so if baked in means it's a part of, so if I'm baking a cake, if I put baking soda in my ingredients, it's throughout, right?
No, but systemic.
Yes, it is. You can't separate the baking soda when you're eating that cake. Right. So that's what we're saying.
That's just not the example that I would choose. I would
but
say
that's what the word means. That's what it defines. You know, and that's the thing. We can't negate from what its definition is, because that's the truth of the word.
We are looking at the definition, and when we look at the definition of systemic racism, we're looking, it does not mean that it is throughout every single aspect of the system. What it means
is there systemic racism in America?
We actually adopted a definition. Everybody,
hold on, Gina. Tamisha, is there systemic racism in America? Forget about Fairfield.
But where our context is fair, like, listen, are there evil people throughout the world? Not all over the world. I don't consider myself evil. So we can't lump everything.
Is there systemic racism in America?
I believe there's racism across the globe.
That's answered your own question.
No, I didn't say systemic. I did not use the word systemic.
But that's what it means.
Actually, just to be clear, just to contextualize this for everyone, back in February, we agreed on a definition, and I put it on the bottom of the sentence there. If you can look at the screen, it's a combination. In this context, we agreed as a working definition that it was a combination of systems that disadvantage BIPOC people, and in this case, residents, in terms of access and opportunity. And that's the conversation that Gina is referring to. I looked back at our definition of accepted, of what we accepted. So I think that understanding it in the context of how we defined it is why we ultimately were comfortable back in February as a group moving forward using systemic racism, because this has been something we've been talking about and has been in the blueprint for months now because of that agreed on definition. So I just want to frame this and ground this in that mutual understanding of where we were. Well, back in February when we agreed on those terms, but also just in the context of the document, which, you know, and I appreciate you, bringing up here. I'm not trying to squash the conversation. I'm just trying to say, let's remember the context in which we are talking about it, which was that agreed upon language back in February.
I think if we expect our town to make such of a declaration, we are damaging the town of Fairfield, where we chose to live, where we pay our taxes, where we expect the community to thrive. This is going to be a really, it's going to come back to bite the town of Fairfield.
I think, if I understand, Tamisha, I think the word that you're saying is it's like pervasive. I think that you're equating the word systemic with pervasive and saying that it's everywhere, right? Like that. I think that's your issue with it. That
so can we choose another word outside of systemic?
I think my opinion, sorry, this is Emma K. I'm just thinking if you take out the word systemic, it also undermines your argument that there needs to be policy changes. So if part of what you're saying is, okay, we need to change the policy of education and the policy of housing, and like, you know, there's things we're not asking everyone to just be nice. It has to be a policy change. If you take out systemic, you're undermining that argument.
But systemic racism is a very controversial term. And maybe to Tamisha's point, by omitting that word, we're getting our message across more clearly without discussing something that's very controversial. I don't think systemic racism is something that's approved to be universal or that somebody can point. I just don't, that's a term that's not agreed upon. And I'm just sharing my opinion on that. I don't think we lose anything by removing the word. By saying the impact of racism versus systemic.
Exactly.
I agree, Jason. I think you said it right. I think we don't take away anything by removing the word systemic. And I think, you know, just acknowledging that there is an existence and impact of racism, I think that acknowledging that and knowing that, okay, we acknowledge that and we know better, so let's do better. We don't need the word systemic to say, well, this is the reason why we need to do better. That's the reason why we need to have recommendations. You know, I mean, I think that you work to always improve. And so this is a new acknowledgement, and let's improve upon that, is my thought.
Nancy, can you read that definition again?
A combination of systems that disadvantages BIPOC residents in access and opportunity.
I think that when Brenda formed the task force, she didn't form the task force, I don't think, based on what she said, in order for the members of the task force to bring forward articles and point out specific incidences of racism that happened in the town. Anybody can read about those in the paper. I think that the point of the task force, if I understood Brenda's marching orders and the mission statement, was to dig deep into the systems that run Fairfield and the different things that are at play in Fairfield, like the way human resources works and the way the police department works and the way the fire department works, in order to try to find out whether or not there are different things within the system that disadvantage Black and brown people. If it was just to point out that there are specific incidences of racism in Fairfield, that would be kind of a bizarre marching order. I don't think your marching orders as a task force for the last 16 months have been to point out incidences in Fairfield where somebody was mean to somebody else. I think it was to investigate, and that's why you did all this investigating, and that's why you talked to all these department heads and did this extensive interviewing system and looked at them from that perspective. I think that's what systemic is trying to get at.
And we did, in fact, find systemic concerns. When we looked at traffic stops, we did find that there was a systemic issue. It was not about individual officers at all. It was a systemic issue. When we looked at the differences in graduation rates, that's a systemic issue. That has nothing to do with personal issues.
But in that context,
found more things that were personal.
Systemic would imply larger than the Fairfield Police Department.
Exactly.
All police departments.
Well, no, we're just talking, but we were only asked to look at our police department and the systems that are in place here.
Systemic implies larger than Fairfield, if we're talking about a system of racism. In your example.
I'm not sure that that's actually accurate, because when we're only looking at one system, the system that we're looking at is Fairfield. not extending. And when we looked at, and that data was specifically about Fairfield, not about police all over. It was about traffic stops within the borders of Fairfield. So that's why when we look at that system specifically, we look at the Fairfield school system, we looked at the systems in this town.
I just want to say my personal beliefs around systemic racism are different than what I'm expressing to you here. What I'm expressing to you is that systemic racism in itself is a very controversial topic. And to get people to agree to there being systemic racism is very tough. So when discussing the conversation, it's going to, I think, make it more challenging to get a point across when we're using controversial terminology.
Jason, to that end, we should remember that what we're doing is making recommendations. What we are, our job in terms of what people do or don't do with this, what the administration decides to do, ends once it's presented. So it wouldn't necessarily be the job of this group to do that. So I think it's the job of this group to present our findings. Based on, and I would just to that end, I would say based on the terms that we agreed on back in February, using examining sorry, let me just finish my thought, examining a singular system, we are not saying, you know, and I'm trying to understand, you know, the point of like, does it say that Fairfield, to me, and again, I only hear it through the lens I can hear it. It doesn't say Fairfield is a bad place. It just says this is an issue and it's something that's here. And it's an acknowledgement of that, not at the detritus of all else. It's just that unless we can acknowledge that and deal with it, we can't sort of move past it. So Jason, to your context, our job isn't to try to convince anyone of anything.
Yeah. Also, too, I just pulled up our mission statement, and what it says is the purpose of the task force will be to study and advise the Board of Selectmen on existing town policies and procedures in an effort to enhance and improve Fairfield's commitment to the systemically fair and equal treatment of all town businesses, workers, and visitors, regardless of race. So we were actually tasked to look at systemically fair treatment.
So, Nancy, what if after systemic, in parentheses, we put the definition, combination of systems and that disadvantage, that in there. So we have defined how we have come to that definition.
And I had one thought too, that in a way you're defining in the last line here, the impact of systemic racism. If you didn't say systemic, you're actually defining here by saying racism in Fairfield and committing to addressing racial equity and justice in town governance and town operations. So you are saying that you're addressing, by saying in town governance and town operations, you're saying that you are that you are acknowledging systemic, the systemic work that needs to be done. Even if you didn't have the word systemic in there, you still are saying that because you've got town governance and town operations, which is systemic.
Well, could we, based on the combination, to kind of answer and to combine what both of you are just saying, could we then say, since this is that agreed on definition, could we say the town of Fairfield shall make a formal proclamation and adopt a subsequent resolution acknowledging the existence and impact of systems that disadvantage BIPOC residents in access and opportunity? Take the definition, take out the term systemic racism, and in its place put the definition.
I'm comfortable with that.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think what people are saying is that it's a triggering word. It can be a triggering word in terms of people being defensive about what you're actually saying. And it's interesting that you're reading this now and taking it out, but giving the definition, and it somehow is less triggering.
I think it's a fair point. And we should have learned this lesson before, that when people get stuck on terms, they miss the major message.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, bringing it to our attention makes a lot of sense. And if we were to take out the word systemic and put in that second line there that Nancy has there, that I think would say the same thing without getting people stuck on that one word. Yeah. But it's still saying the exact same thing.
I agree. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So putting then, so we can see it listed. The town of the existence and impact of a combination of systems that disadvantage BIPOC residents in access and opportunity in Fairfield. Mm-hmm. And committing to addressing racial equity and justice in town governance and town operations. Does that sentence read the way everyone? The town of Fairfield. Let me put it in the same so it's not so hard to look at.
Can I get everyone's thought behind why the town has to make a formal proclamation?
That is best practices when we looked at all the other towns that we actually,
but
it wasn't just
if we had,
it's what the national organization says is the best practice.
But
21 like, just, oh, sorry. 21 municipalities around the state have done it. The state itself did it. And when, you know, as Gina just said, it's best practices in terms of what, when we look at all the data supported by the various sources. So I think
can we put that in there as best practice?
It's in there.
I mean, it
is actually in there already. We actually talk about that.
But if I was reading it right as the, you know, BOS, and I saw that, it's like, wait, are you guys suggesting or are you demanding? Because
either way, are you for or against it? I mean, it doesn't matter how it's stated. Do you believe that there should be a proclamation?
I feel that the BOS has already made a proclamation by putting together a task force.
They haven't. A proclamation is a written statement. It's not somebody hiring somebody and you think that's a proclamation. That's not a proclamation. It's got to be
written. There were no written statements. I'm sorry.
Tamisha, it's right there above that where the cursor is. It says that they were informed by best practices in both public and private sectors. So I do think that we do make the statement right there, right before we say it.
Okay.
That is best practices, and that is a recommendation that we're making.
And I'll just to be clear, we talk about these. I just need to say this again. First of all, we do talk about best practices several times throughout the document based on research, but also I come back to the idea that we can't make anybody do anything. So for us, this is just a set of tools and a set of, you know, best practice recommendations based on research, based on qualitative, quantitative data, and again, expert advice and so on. So when we look at what the state of Connecticut did, which was make a declaration, when we look at what 21 municipalities have done, we are making a recommendation because we are looking at best practices, and making a proclamation was among those. So, you know, I just don't want anybody to think this came from nowhere. It hasn't been done.
And to your point, you know, none of this is a list of demands. This is our recommendations based on the research that we've done. What happens to it is up to the Board of Selectmen. There's nothing in here reaches demands.
Yeah, I can say too, having worked on this section initially and looked at a lot of research, like across the country and other plans by other cities. This is like action item number one. Like this, it's just what everybody does. It's part of the beginning of a healing process by actually acknowledging something is considered a first step towards healing and writing things by saying it in a public way, in a formalized way.
I would go so far as to say,
or
if we did nothing else and the town did that, I would be happy personally. That's the first thing that the best practices that happens first. Ryan's point. Yeah. But I mean, we went through all this before. I don't know why we're going through stuff, Nancy, but we went through this exhaustively already.
I appreciate that, but since we are now in the 11th hour and we are voting on it today, this is the moment. And yes, this has been online and available and we've talked about it, but it's not too late for anyone to raise their concerns. So it's better now to get people to a place where, so I hear you. I hear you.
You say so.
So
right?
I'm going to make a motion to accept the language. Again, just being conscious of time and still have a lot to go through. I'm going to make the motion to change the language from systemic racism to, as it appears in highlighted writing, the town of Fairfield shall make a formal proclamation and adopt a subsequent resolution acknowledging the existence and impact of a combination of systems that disadvantage BIPOC residents in access and opportunity in Fairfield and committing to addressing racial equity and justice in town governance and town operations. So the formal proclamation and resolution would acknowledge the existence and impact of a combination of systems that disadvantage BIPOC residents in access and opportunity. And it also commits to addressing racial equity and justice in town governance and town operations. Is there a second?
Are you looking for a second? Yes, second.
Sorry, Nancy, I was muted. I was like having a whole conversation.
Oh.
Can we change the town of Fairfield made a formal proclamation? Because I feel that was done when the first select woman had that sit down. No.
All right, there is a second. I'm not ignoring you. There's a second. There is a second to my motion on the table. We have to vote on that. And then we can pick up what you're saying, although there was no proclamation made, but we can come back to that. So Innie seconded it, I believe.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Gina? She is.
Aye.
Steve?
Aye, yes.
Okay, and Tamisha and Sandra, aye. Abstention, no.
Aye.
Tamisha?
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay, so it passes. Now, did you want to make another amendment to our amendment? Which is what you just said?
But you guys are saying that that was not a proclamation. So what was that?
It was a meeting.
Call to action, yeah.
So her address was not her proclamation?
A proclamation is a formal document that goes.
It's submitted, right, Nancy? What would be the formal way of submitting something, or what would be
a proclamation?
Proclamation.
A proclamation is literally it's a formal piece of paper. It's a written declaration, and a resolution is something that can be taken up at the town and it just becomes part of your, formal like code, which it is not. She had a call to action. We acknowledge that in the very beginning in the governance section, saying that the administration should be commended for making an action plan, but no, the administration has not made a formal proclamation. And again, I remind everybody, these are recommendations. What the administration will do with them is totally, not part of the purview of this group. It's a list of best practices, recommendations, findings.
And I think that our task was to find the best practices and bring them forward. And because this is what the best practices say, this document is literally just bringing it forward and saying, this is what it should do. Whether or not it gets done or not is up for their vote and their purview.
Okay, so let me just make sure that it is, yep. All right, so the sentence, the racial, which in some ways just leads right into this discussion, the REJTF supports acknowledging racism as a public health crisis. I'm going to vote to remove that sentence and instead insert this language, which just says on Tuesday, June 1st, the state of Connecticut, in a vote of 114 to 33, declared racism a public health crisis in Connecticut. 21 Connecticut municipalities have declared racism a health crisis and are taking steps to fight it. So I'd like to make a motion to insert that language. Do I have a second?
Second that.
Any discussion on that item? So what I've done is removed the REJTF supports acknowledging racism as a public health crisis, and instead I've made two sentences that talk about what's happened at the state of Connecticut and the municipalities. Any discussion? All in favor?
For right now, can you leave it like that so I would be able to see it later and get it documented correctly? Yeah.
Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any?
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Gina,
Aye.
okay, great. Any abstentions or no's? And I'm gonna make a second motion, which just is backup of a resource from the CDC, which is just a source used. It wasn't in there before, but it's information from the CDC. You're welcome to click on it, but it's just their declaration of what the parameters of declaring it a public health crisis. So I've added that. So I'm going to make a motion to add that source. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
All right. Any abstentions or no's? Okay. So moving right along, we have the fourth recommendation about the commission, the fifth about the task force and the permanent task force, and the Officer of Community Justice and Belonging. We'll change the titles per the earlier discussion. That's why that's highlighted. So now we go into the 6 areas: governance, current state recommendations, and resources and rationale. Same, I did talk to, just FYI, Chief Calamares today and talked through all of this, and he's going to see the draft tomorrow, but I read him a lot of it, and he was, at least in theory, he hasn't read the actual language, but we talked through it, just so you know. I do want to make a motion to add the statement, For a more accurate assessment of current state, the REJTF recommends a follow-up study from the Connecticut Racial Profiling Group. Is there a second to that? It's literally just a statement that says, for a more accurate assessment of current state, we need to do a new study, which, by the way, is already underway. So I'm making that formal motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions or no? Okay. Anyone have any? Well, we'll get there. Okay, so policing. Housing, I want to make a motion to add this paragraph, and it's taken directly from Mark Barnhart, who described this process and then asked for a subsequent, support, because he doesn't have the means to follow through with the grievances. So I'll read it out loud. I'm making a motion to add this paragraph under the housing section under current state. The Director of Community and Economic Development, acting as the town's fair housing officer, receives and responds to complaints alleging violations of federal or state fair housing law. While the director provides regular training on fair housing matters to the Fairfield Board of Realtors and provides guidance and counsel to those questions, the director currently has limited resources to manage this process thoroughly. Consequently, once initial information is gathered from a complainant, the matters are typically referred to the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, or to HUD, CHRO, for a more thorough investigation and possible enforcement action. So that I'd like to make a motion to add that to the current state under housing. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on the item? Okay.
Yep. Sorry. Yep. So this is just like, this is what happens now when this. Yep. Okay.
So basically, in speaking with Mark Barnhart, who also acts in his role as Director of Community and Economic Development, that's currently where he sits, is he's the one that hears all any fair housing complaints. Mm-hmm. And he's just, overwhelmed because he just doesn't have the time to do the thorough investigation. So oftentimes local matters are referred to the state level. And if we can solve more of these issues, it would be more helpful to residents if we could handle them here, is his sort of rationale, but he just doesn't have the bandwidth. So if he has the resources, it's just something to look at. So this is just a statement of current practice. This is what this paragraph does.
Gotcha.
So we have a second on the floor. Any other discussion or questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any abstentions or no's? Good, and then I added a line, so I'm gonna make a motion to add under recommendations, invest resources for a thorough local grievance process of any fair housing complaints.
So that's an added recommendation.
Yep.
And that's based on what he said to you.
Correct.
You're going to leave all of these highlighted for me, right?
Yep. Is there any, so I'm making the motion to add that sentence. Is there any?
I second the motion.
Great. Any discussion? And again, I would just say for discussion purposes, it's purposely vague because it could mean a lot of different things, but I think it shows that it's an area worth investigating and exploring and figuring out what those resources could look like. So I thought it was important to include based on looking back at some of the, and Dan Iacovella had reminded me of this. So he was the one really invested in the housing section. So if no other discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any Opposed? Or abstentions? Okay. Education, community engagement. List of partners, arts and culture. Conclusion. And then just our list of people either gave these to me, they're from our media list. These were examples of articles sent to us. If you ever sent me an email and said, look at this, it's here. Again, it doesn't mean that they're all vetted. It's just that we've used them in research. We've acknowledged them. Someone's read it. It was useful. So that's what all these are. They're book lists. So any other amendments to make to the document? So I would say we have a vote on the floor for the document, but now I'm going to make a motion to amend the original vote to include the document as amended. Do I have a second?
I second it.
Who was that?
Gina.
Gina. Okay.
Any discussion?
The original document
we're now amending the original motion to accept the document as amended. So we're basically now voting on this document as amended. So is there discussion? Now would be the time to tell us how good you feel, how much you're going to miss us.
Well, Nancy, where is the get together?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll discuss that once we deliver, because that is next on the agenda, is just to quickly talk about, and we can bring that up next time, what our plan is. But right now, anything document related from the members of the task force, from the community members. Okay. So we have a motion and a seconded motion. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Jason?
Aye.
Steve? I know he was here. I'm going to give it another second. Doug has weighed in. Well, it's passing. I'm going to just give Steve a chance to weigh in because he was disconnected. I know Doug has been very involved in the editing, and I'm sorry he's not here to be able to vote, but I know it would have his support, and the same with Karen, who had they both had personal obligations. So I'm trying to stall to give Steve a moment to also vote on it, but he is not coming on, but we'll let him sneak in if he can jump back on. So great, so we'll make those changes, and then we will, feel free to, if you had somebody that you were working with in your deep listening and want to share it, the idea is to present this to the Board of Selectmen on the 31st. So we need to talk about next steps in terms of what that is going to look like. We can talk about that at next week's meeting, but we are going to, it won't be me because you're presenting it to me. I certainly will be able to say some words about the process. Anyone have anything to say? Any comments?
So is this going to be formatted? How are you going to present it?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty much as, you know, a cleaned up PDF, but we're going to present it as such. It'll be a little bit cleaned up so that it lines up, but it'll be because there are so many pages to it. We're going to send it as an electronic document, and there's so many links, rather, so many pages of links.
Okay.
And since everybody's meeting online these days. So Steve, was that you calling in? I just let somebody in. I don't know who was dialing in.
I think that was
if you want to, we just voted. I wanted to give you the opportunity to vote yay or nay on the document.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you, Steve. Do you have any comments? We have voted, but anything you want to add?
No, I'm happy with the document. Thanks for a good learning experience, and we'll see you around the block.
Well, we still have next week and the week after to plan, so don't go too far. We're going to be looking for, 2-3 volunteers to present it. And it doesn't have to be it's just talking through the highlights of the document, and we can work with you to figure out what that would look like. But so I wanted on the agenda, I can't remember, did we say we were gonna act on next steps? I'm going to vote to table any action until a date certain, which is next week, because I think everyone could use a minute. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor of just tabling any action plan to next week?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So, anyone have anything they want to say?
This has been a great learning experience. It really has. And really being with everyone for all these months and learning, and the incredible amount of respect that people showed each other was inspiring. There's a lot to learn from that, in spite of everything that we began with, and it was rough going. But we ended up in a good place. And I'd like to thank Gina and Nancy for really not letting go and steering the ship in the right direction, no matter how turbulent the waters were. So thank you for that. I know it hasn't been easy, and I'm sure it's not going to be easy after this report is released. For the two of you, I mean, yes, all of us will have our share, but I think two of you will probably get the most of the negativity. And for that, apologies, but also thank you. Knowing fully well that leaders are the ones who get the wrath. Very rarely do they get all the kudos, but when negativity comes, they are the ones who are right in the front, and they shield everyone else behind them. So thank you.
You're the nicest way to say things, Annie.
I know. I was just going to say you made that sound actually really beautiful. I don't know. I'm gonna remain an optimist. All these months later, I remain optimistic. I think this document, we really tried to, and I appreciate the comments where, maybe I see something some way, but I've appreciated the input where like, oh no, you should see it this way, because this is how some other people are going to see it. And I really do think we've struck a balance with presenting best practices, not inserting personal bias, but really trying to paint an accurate picture of what we learned and heard and researched. and tried to present that in a fair way. That's not an indictment of people specifically.
I think the whole point is to dissenting voices are always good for any process, because if you don't, that's why this took so long. It just needed to have a lot of different input. And so it is all ultimately always appreciated.
Yeah, but Gina, that is maturity that can see that and can articulate that and can listen to that, to even acknowledge that dissenting voices are welcome and we learn from them. That is a tremendous growth in the individual. So I acknowledge that in you. Thank you.
Can you just follow me around and say nice things to me all the time?
Yeah, totally.
That would just make my life. Yeah, thank you. And really, I appreciate everything and all of you. I'm just so exhausted right now, which is why I'm a little quiet tonight, but I just really appreciate all the hard work. And I also want to take a minute to acknowledge the non-committee members who show up week after week after week. Just you are what kept this engine running more than anything, because you didn't have to be here, but you wanted to be here, and that means the world. And I hope that we've done justice to you as well, because you are why we did it.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you all. As a member of the community, I really, really appreciate all of the hard work that you've done and given so much of your personal time and throughout all this controversial stuff. You've just done an amazing job. And I think that everyone's already said it, but you have a really balanced document and recommendations. And I really appreciate that, because it's more likely to be accepted if it's balanced.
Thank you.
Well, if there's nothing further, we will, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn with the knowledge that we have just completed a giant hurdle as a team collectively. And, thank you. It hasn't always been easy, but it's been worthy, so.
I second that motion.
Nancy is Patrina. Just 1 minute. I was trying to unmute myself. I'm sorry. I just want to say thank you to all of you, the leadership of Gina and Nancy, and to the task force. It certainly has been a lot of learning that has gone on for me, and I appreciate everyone taking the time and being a part of the task force. So thank you all.
Thank you. All right, so
I'm going to second the motion to adjourn.
Great. Anyone? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, any abstentions or no's? All right, thank you all, and we'll see you next week for next steps.